So what kind of evidence do we have? Let me start with Paul. I personally find this the most convincing. Paul, in his genuine letters, mentions James and Peter. So the disciples of Jesus in Jerusalem, James, Jesus' brother. It would be extraordinary if Paul made this up. And also, it doesn't actually help his case most of the time because it seems like these guys didn't get along. And so Paul would have traded off of the idea that he's an exclusive authority, or maybe he wouldn't have been so harsh about James and Peter if they had actually gotten along and tried to trade off that association as part of his authority. But he doesn't do this. And so why would there be people in Jerusalem following a guy who never existed? It just really doesn't stand to reason. Then the Gospels, to what extent do they have an oral tradition or not, especially the canonical ones? Do they possess that? I'm not certain. Luke gives some hint that he's talked to people who have those experiences, but of, either seeing Christ or talking to people who did, eyewitnesses. That's another subject too. But I think that combination of Paul's testimony and the degree to which we can think that the Gospels reflect in later generations an awareness of Jesus as a person, that's probably our best evidence. Now, what evidence do we have outside of the Christian ambit? So, say, Romans reflecting on the Christian movement and on Jesus. I would identify 4 points to consider. And none of them are slam dunks, but again, in the aggregate, I think that we can feel as though we have more evidence than not that Jesus was a historical person. The first is the Jewish historian Josephus. Josephus was captured during the Jewish War by the Flavians, and he was tasked with writing a history of the Jewish people. In the course of writing this, I think in 2 places, chapter 18, he mentions Christianity and Jesus. But the way he does it is questioned by some scholars because it sounds a little bit like theological formulae that you would find from Christians in later centuries. And Josephus largely survives to us because of the history of the Jews that he tells. It was relevant to Christianity, and so Christians preserved him, even though, again, he himself is not a Christian. He's writing for pagan emperors. He is capturing an image or an impression, a history of the first century, at the very least, of the Jewish people, relevant to the study of Christianity. Now, he also mentions John the Baptist. So this is where things get a little bit complicated because let's say the theological formulae calling Jesus the Christ, for example, that's awfully odd for a Jewish person to do, to be like, oh, the Messiah came, by the way, and I'm going to say nothing else about it, right? So that's what he says about Jesus, but he mentions John the Baptist too. So personally, so this is my theory, I could see that maybe there was a legitimate passage about Jesus in Josephus potentially, or one that was, and fussed with, one that was tinkered with, or one that was legitimate that was amplified because the passage about John the Baptist, scholars don't question. It sounds like Josephus, it's his kind of language, it fits with the theme. There's no theological formulae there. Now imagine you're somebody preserving Josephus for the purposes of Christianity, and there's a passage about how famous John the Baptist was, and either a incomplete or no passage about Jesus. You're going to probably fudge that one a little bit, and that seems to be what we have. So complicated. There could have been an original core there, something about Jesus similar to what we find about John the Baptist, but we can't quite be certain. But I can tell you that we do have passages about Jesus in Josephus. What we do with those, again, open question, something else we can talk about. I'm going to lump together the second example, 2 Roman historians, Tacitus and Suetonius. They're both writing a history of various Roman subjects, the emperor's Roman history. And in the course of that, they talk about Nero, the persecutions of the what we would assume are the Christians, but they use terms Christus and Crestus, almost like a game of telephone. They have it kind of right. And so when I teach about Tacitus and Suetonius, they're writing in the early 2nd century, I don't tell my students that this is necessarily reliable information because, maybe they have just the names wrong, or maybe they're talking about somebody else. We can't be sure. Also, there's reasons to question the way that the persecutions under Nero are framed in those passages. So again, complicated, not a slam dunk, but something that we can add to our roster of evidence for, at the very least, maybe something that is the Christian movement, the Jesus movement. So even if it's in early 2nd century and it's not quite fully formed in the minds of the Romans, there's a hint there that something is going on. And then around the same time, usually dated to about 112 or 113, are the letters of Pliny and Trajan. Pliny was a governor in Bithynia Pontus, so the northeast part of the empire, and he's writing to Trajan, who's the Roman emperor, and he is arresting people who are called Christians. And when he does so, he actually asks them to confirm that they see the emperor as an authority figure. If they refuse to do so, he gives them a second chance. If they still refuse to do so because they're obstinate, he is executing them. So he writes to the emperor to make sure that's cool. And he says, yeah, go right ahead. Now, this is strong evidence, again, in the 2nd century, that there was a movement of some kind based on a historical figure that has started to really gain steam to the point where now they're blipping on the map of the Roman authorities. Now, there are also reasons to question this passage. In recent years, scholars have started to note, kind of like what I was talking about with Josephus, some of the language in Pliny's letter doesn't really match how he talks in his other letters. So let's bracket that for now, because this is a little bit of a new movement within the field to question those letters in particular. But as I say, while not a slam dunk, in the aggregate, each of these little pieces of information, coupled with, as I mentioned, the letters of Paul and the Gospels, give us more evidence than not that Jesus was a historical person. So if you'd like to know more about any of these subjects, obviously I've presented a picture that is complicated and you might want to know more. Check out the Biblical Studies Academy, the BSA. You can go to bartehrman.com, that's BARTEHRMAN.com/BSA learning. There we have a forum with discussion boards. There's a whole library of courses that you can take from other leading experts within the field. You can ask questions and explore your curiosity in a space where you can just go at your own pace. There's no jargon, and you'll find people who have the same curiosity as you do. So do check it out, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Thanks.